When Meriwether Lewis finally pushed off his large keelboat and support pirogues, or canoes, from Pittsburgh in late summer 1803, August to be exact, the Ohio River was low. Lewis's frustrations with delays at Pittsburgh, especially with the building of the keelboat, stemmed largely from difficulties he rightly worried about if the river should become impassable. On the other hand, the obstacles helped steel his crew for the even more serious problems ahead, eventually on the Missouri River, called the Big Muddy and sometimes referred to as Old Misery. As Lewis and party journeyed down the river, the almost 20-yard-long keelboat frequently encountered low-water riffles, forcing the crew to push and pull or lift and drag the glorified barge over sandbars and mud aisles. Not far north of Pittsburgh, Lewis navigated the so-called riffle near Logtown settlement on September 2, unloading, pulling, and reloading the boat. A local farmer with a horse and ox was enlisted to help at another stall point later the same day. Lewis paid him $1, but grumbled, quote,
"The inhabitants who live near these riffles live much by the distressed situation of the traveler. They are generally lazy, charge extravagantly when they are called on for assistance, and have no philanthropy or continence."
I think he meant conscience. I roughly tracked Lewis's movements down the Ohio from Pittsburgh, passing through Steubenville and Wheeling, as well as similar contemporary settlements like what is today called Moundsville, and the first federally sanctioned settlement west of the Appalachians, Marietta, with Parkersburg nearby. All of these upper Ohio towns early on were fairly well organized collections of mostly New Englanders and Pennsylvanians. Their histories, woven in the Trans-Appalachian Allegheny frontier stories and events recounted in my first book, reflected a movement of people and supplies ever more quickly westward. Indian populations were shoved deeper into the forests of the Northwest Territory. The pioneer culture, regulated initially mostly by volunteer militias, fostered honorable and even heroic deeds of a selfless nature. At the same time, though, some scandal and rebellious obstinance among new settlers and native populations stirred trouble from time to time. In Wheeling, West Virginia, Lewis picked up some more supplies shipped from Philadelphia. Further along, Marietta, developed next to a sacred Indian mound, was one prosperous place that before 1800 already had attracted travelers' curiosity and respect. Here, 2 dead drunk crew members had to be retrieved by Lewis and were unceremoniously dumped into the boats. Nearby Parkersburg and Belpré, originally named Newport, shared Marietta's intrigues and harbored both sympathizers and active opponents of an alleged and tried Aaron Burr Blennerhassett Island conspiracy. That plan to float a militia contingent south in order to establish a possible sovereign outpost independent of the federal government in Washington ended in abrupt failure and trials for treason. There were more than one such idea conceived in the valleys of the Ohio and Mississippi rivers about that time, even as Lewis and Clark were trudging toward the Pacific Ocean. Lewis also visited Grave Creek Mound at today's Moundsville, West Virginia, one of the largest conical earthworks of previous generations of indigenous Americans.
I went on shore to view a remarkable artificial mound of earth called by the people in this neighborhood the Indian Grave. This remarkable mound stands on the east bank of the Ohio, 12 miles below Wheeling and about 700 paces from the river. As the land is not cleared, the mound is not visible from the river. Near the summit of this mound grows a white oak tree whose girth is 13.5 feet. From the aged appearance of this tree, I think its age might reasonably calculate at 300 years. The whole mound is covered with large timber, sugar tree, hickory, poplar, red and white oak, etc. September 7, 1803.
Lewis's small convoy of boats continued southwest to Fort Washington, now Cincinnati. After a week's rest, his boats and skeleton crew passed a glade on the river bottoms planted by settlers from Pennsylvania. This nearby wilderness town, not far from Louisville, named Rising Sun, today bears a faint scent of what life along the, quote, beautiful river, the Ohio River, may have been in the eastern frontier era. The Big Bend on the Indiana-Kentucky border was already plied by steady pioneer traffic, and a few miles further south of the cabins, on the river's eastern shore, a curious collection of fossils were piled in salty mud and detritus beside a creek bed that had become widely known as Big Bone Lick. President Thomas Jefferson had heard of Big Bone, and Lewis was instructed to examine its contents on his way to the meetup with Clark downriver. Apparently, the bottoms of Rising Sun were a place that Indians often encamped and held their councils. The Indians in the first settlement of this region, quote,
were not troublesome. They sometimes created alarms, but committed no serious depredations.
Already in 1798, Samuel Fulton and his father John Fulton, with their families, had emigrated from Lancaster County in Pennsylvania. They bought land on the West Bank that would be surveyed by one Benjamin Chambers. Chambers, a government official, an unidentified writer opined, quote,
carried the measuring chain over the land on which stands the present city of Rising Sun. He was a native of Chambersburg, Pennsylvania. His father was a prominent patriot and officer in the Revolutionary War, and the family was distinguished for intelligence, social position, and Christian virtues.
John Fulton and wife had been captives of Indians, witnessing 2 of their children murdered during the war. One son, Robert, though later successfully applied steam to the propulsion of boats, notably steamboats and other vehicles.
beautiful scenery of green and lofty hills, opening fields, lofty forest trees, and winding river presented an enchanting picture to his family. He was a pioneer of man's excellent qualities. His daring exploits in hunting, simplicity of manners, and integrity of character secured the confidence of his neighbors, and he was elected colonel of the militia. He then was appointed by General William H. Harrison, then governor of the territory, justice of the peace. He was a Presbyterian by faith and profession, and opened his house for preaching.
A female pioneer of 1798, Polly Covington, a daughter of Colonel Fulton, years later said, "Those were right happy times, better than now, good neighbors and confidence in each other." Another pioneer, a gentleman of high character and intelligence, a son of the founder of Rising Sun, Dr. Basil James, said, "The manners of the early settlers were plain and simple, and their morals far excelled in excellence those of the present day." This view, according to the same report, was held by Charlotte Chambers Ludlow, who said the nearby Cincinnati society in 1797 consisted of, quote, "a small number of ladies united by the most perfect goodwill and desire of mutual happiness. The gentlemen were social and intelligent." By around 1850, a church celebratory document states, quote,
As venerable pioneers, some, like aged trees left to tell of a former forest, still remain.
The actual town here in dense forest along the river didn't take the full form of a village until well after Lewis's boats passed. In the spring of 1814, John James sorted and awarded lots, quote,
on certain squares, except the corner lots, to emigrants, who would within 1 year erect a 2-story log or frame house with a brick or stone chimney, worth not less than $200.
One lot was donated to each religious denomination. Rising Sun eventually became a port for steamboat traffic during the 19th century. The steamboat and transportation history of both the Ohio and Missouri rivers is a remarkable story unto itself. Even today, speedboat racing and especially steady barge traffic on the Ohio River draws annual attention and festivities, sometimes even international participation. Oddly, during my travels along the Missouri River, in June 2024, I observed literally no boat traffic at all for almost 1,000 miles. The reason is unknown to me. The first steamboat passed Rising Sun in 1814. The noisy contraption with, quote, rudely constructed engine put into it apparently was a converted large barge that had made voyages from Cincinnati to New Orleans, roughly 8 months round trip. This steamer, named Independence, was pressed into service by Andrew Jackson during the Battle of New Orleans. Then, turning north, she stopped for wood at Rising Sun.
Quote, John James furnished her with fence rails for fuel and agreed to take his pay in a passage to Cincinnati. He embarked, but such was the slow speed of the steamer that when he got to North Bend, he left the boat and walked to Cincinnati, arriving some 12 hours before the steamer.